They say Australians are among the biggest book buyers in the world. Does that mean they use books more, perhaps? Or does it mean that our libraries are not giving them what they want? In fact, what do our libraries do? Well, we have one chap, for instance. He comes to the library once a week on the dot. I'm not a reader, he'll say, but he's certainly got a use for books.
Which features a roll collar extending to a low backline, a simple classic garment which is completed with a tie belt, and a lovely slim-fitting skirt which looks so attractive on all age groups. She has teamed with her dress a luxurious fur stole.
Story time. Everybody ready? Deep in the bush, close beside a creek, there grew a tall red gum tree. High up in one of the hollow branches was a hideaway hole, and this was where Flip had made his home. Now Flip was a possum, a very special possum. Smaller than a mouse, he had large round ears, a small pink nose, long twitchy whiskers, and a lovely fringed tail just like a feather. There he is. It was a useful tail, too. When Flip had snuggled down among the dried leaves which lined his hole, he would curl his feather tail over his head and sleep and sleep.
Children get to know the world through books. They're groping forward, getting in touch. But others are keeping in touch. I'm thinking especially of those people in the cities who can't get out. Old people and invalids. We take them anything they want. Westerns, romances, whodunits. A lot of them have specialist interests. We try to keep them supplied with all the reference material they need. I know one man. He's an entomologist. He's got a great collection of insects. He gets letters from all over the world, from universities and professors. A lot of these people have led very interesting and active lives. You tend to forget this when you see them shut in. One of the women I visit used to be a travelling nurse in the outback. She's always wanting to talk about old times and her roamings. Talking and reading are like breathing to them. You can't just drop their books in and dash away. You've got to stay and have a chat with them, show an interest in them. I know I've learned a lot from talking about their lives and interests. They do appreciate being able to talk to someone. It's a bit like visiting a hospital with one patient. Though, of course, we're not Red Cross workers.
It's an interesting fact. You find with mothers of families that being in hospital is the first time for ages they haven't had to cook 3 meals a day and look after the children and do the washing. They can draw breath and relax a bit. When they're convalescent, I mean. They ask mainly for light stuff, magazines and that sort of thing. They like to get new ideas for their homes from them, which I suppose means more work for their husbands. With so many migrants in Australia now, we have to cope with a lot more requests for foreign magazines. But you want to look at the travelling libraries to get the foreign interest, those communities in the Snowy River scheme.
I heard in Germany that Australia is a land of heat and flies, you know. We live here in the highest town of your country, Cabramura. We had 1 meter of snow here the last month. The traveling library is coming up from Kuma. My husband and I and the children, we all look forward to its visit each fortnight.
Out in the bush, the kids have a different idea of a library. You know the sort of thing, school teacher asks a kid, "What's a library, Tommy?" And Tommy says, "Oh, it's a big box on a truck, and, well, there's a man in it." Well, I'm the man in the box in this part of the world anyway. You do a bit of travelling all right. I suppose I'd cover about 1,000 miles of Victoria every fortnight. 36 stops altogether, and 20 of them at schools. You'd think I was the ice cream man, the sort of welcome I get sometimes. I reckon these kids read much the same as city kids, on the whole that is. You know the sort of thing, space travel, science fiction, animal stories. It's good to see them so keen about their library at this early stage, and you just hope that their interest keeps up as they go on in life.
Oh, we have a beaut library. No storybooks. It's all reference, you know, serious things we have to know for classes. Any light stuff we want, we'd have to go up the road and buy it, or to the nearest lending library. We start to use it pretty early on, and, oh, I suppose it was a bit confusing at first, but it's pretty simple, really. You've got to learn to use the index. Mostly it's fairly easy. But there's a full-time librarian if you do need help. I'd love to buy books of my own, or Mum and Dad, I mean, but they couldn't set me up with all the books I need at home. I don't know any kids with parents who could. And if I go into uni, it'd be even more so, wouldn't it? Not that I'm sure of going to uni. It depends on exams and a few other things, too.
By the time they come up here, most of the students can find their way about Fisher. We call it just Fisher. It's an institution, the Fisher Library, founded in the University of Sydney in 1852. There's tremendous pressure on the universities nowadays, with more and more young people coming up, and more demand for university-trained people in the community. This means more and more of everything in the universities. More staff, more books, more buildings to put them in. This new building caters for over 16,000 students. Of course, a good university library has to satisfy the needs of the staff in their research, as well as helping students to pass their examinations. It's not going too far to say that without a library, a university is like a runner without legs. We're rather proud of Fisher. It's not only the oldest, but the largest university library in Australia, which is not to say, mind you, that it's ever complete. It must never stop growing, adding to stocks and using new aids to learning, things like audio aids. You can learn here by listening as well as by reading.
it's corny to say Beethoven's the great challenge. It's because if you can begin to play him, to understand him I mean, you've sort of begun to be a musician, a serious musician. Actually, whatever sort of musician you want to be, a composer or a performer, the further you go, the more you realise that all music depends on other music. I mean, it has ancestors. At the conservatorium, we learn about music by looking at it as much as by hearing it, especially the older music. I mean, if it hadn't been written down, it wouldn't be there, would it? Even today, when music's recorded on discs and tape and stuff, and we can compare performances and hear how its composer's meant it to go, we still have to have the written score. I suppose this is corny, but I'm always moved when I think of that one original sheet of music paper, and now there are millions of copies of it. It's a sort of immortality.
At the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, we maintain the most important scientific libraries in Australia. We carry out experiments in many fields, and our libraries have to keep up with us. At the Division of Food Preservation, for instance, we're interested in research into the quality of foodstuffs. One of our problems is the defects which occur in eggs, like the development of a pasty yolk. Certain plants contain oils with unusual fatty acids, and when these plants are fed to hens, their eggs develop this pasty yolk. Now we make these fatty acids radioactive before feeding them to the hens, so we can follow their course in the developing egg. The results we obtain are circulated throughout scientific libraries, and eventually, out of all this, we should get a better egg. The same goes for all our work. Without libraries, the results would take longer, if we got them at all. It's the difference between sending a letter by cleft stick or using the phone.
Look, let's be frank about all this, eh? Scientists pick each other's brains, and in industry we do the same. Except we do it two ways while the boffins do it one way. We, of course, have our own scientists, but through the public libraries we can pick the brains of scientists elsewhere who've already met and solved some of the problems facing us. All perfectly legitimate. In fact, if we couldn't make use of other people's findings in this way, everything would come to a halt. This is an age of great technological change, and we must keep up with new developments. Highly industrialized countries can't keep up if they waste time plodding over ground already covered by their more energetic brethren. And you can take it from me that an immense amount of ground has already been covered, and most of it's available through the libraries. So God bless the libraries. Whatever you're trying to develop, in primary or secondary industry, you come up against problems that have already been tackled by someone else. Whether they're problems concerned with using water for irrigation to develop our agricultural output, or of harnessing water for use in the many power stations we're building all over the country, you can count on finding the answers tucked away somewhere on the library shelves. Australia is beginning to tap another source of power as the search for oil goes on across the face of the country. This is a new field of research for us, but in other fields we've been keeping records of our findings for many years. And of course this stockpile of information is accumulated not only for the use of industry, but for the running of the nation too.
Mr. President, the purpose of this bill is to seek the approval of Parliament for the International Wheat Agreement. Now, the relatively dry conditions under which Australian wheat is grown are reflected in the average yield of 17.4 bushels an acre for the past 10 years, a low figure.
Consider, Mr. Speaker, that this country is faced with increasing pressure from overseas, from highly industrialised countries who want to establish a market for their goods here. The following figures are highly significant. But before quoting them, I ask honourable members
Australia's area totals 2,978,581 square miles. This is about the same size as the United States of America.
In Canberra, as you'd expect, the members of the Senate and House of Representatives keep the Parliamentary Library pretty busy. And if their own library can't help them, they come to us at the National Library.
To answer all their questions, we have to be able to locate books and articles on many subjects, from libraries all over Australia, and to help us in our search, we use the Union Catalogue at the library. The catalogue is kept up to date by a system of punched tapes, which can be continually altered as new material comes in. When the time comes to reprint the catalogue, the tapes can rattle it off all by themselves. A teleprinter links us with other major libraries in Australia, so we produce the answers pretty quickly. Apart from acting as a source of reference for members of the Commonwealth Parliament and for government departments, the National Library specialises in the literature of Australia and other countries and tries to help coordination between the state public libraries. So a man in search of information can find an answer with the help of the network of national and state libraries throughout the country. You get a huge variety of questions.
I'm representing a group of Parramatta businessmen, and we want to commemorate the city's early history with a mural. Can you help us to get the details accurate?
If you take it from the original, you can't go wrong. Not that all early maps are accurate, of course. The earliest explorers had some weird ideas, as can be seen from this map of Australia produced in about 1547. By the time Captain Cook was making his voyages, the records had become accurate. From his original journal, we know that he changed the name of Stingray Harbour to Botany Bay. And it was on this voyage that he saw his first kangaroo.
My theatre group's producing a 16th century play, and we have to make all the costumes ourselves. The first thing I want is details of a Lombard soldier's uniform.
Well, at this time, a soldier wore a sword like a short dagger, not the usual long sword at all, and the belt was to carry the sword.
Can you inform me when the first edition of Dryden's poem Absalom and Achitophel was published?
In 1681. According to original notes in a collection of 17th century literature, which incidentally Australia is lucky to have as it's the best in the southern hemisphere.
Is Chinese literature really the oldest in the world?
No, not the oldest, but it has the longest history of any written in a single language. Of course, Asia, China and Japan for example, has produced works of historical, intellectual and artistic interest for more than 2,500 years.
Look, I'm doing anthropology and I've got plenty of written stuff about the Aborigines, but have you got any visual stuff?
Yes, we have photographic records of Aboriginal customs and ceremonies made by Australian anthropologists, which is just as well because many of these are dying out.
I belong to a poetry reading club and we're concentrating just now on modern Australian poets. Have you got anything by our poets about their own work?
Yes, several of them have recorded their own interpretations of their work, like A.D. Hope reading Circe.
Circe. Behind her, not the quivering of a leaf flutters the deep enchantment of the wood. No ripple at her feet disturbs the well. She sits among her lovers, dazed with grief, bewildered by the charge of alien blood. Herself transfigured by the hideous spell, she sits among her creatures motionless, sees the last human shadow of despair fade from the sad, inquisitive animal eyes. The naked body of the sorceress, mocked by the light, sleek shapes.
There's an account of Flinders' expedition which has just come out. I'm interested in buying a copy, but only if it's dead accurate.
We often find ourselves acting as a sort of arbiter on other people's claims. In fact, this edition is dead accurate. It's a facsimile of Flinders' original journal, photographically reproduced, and you can't get more accurate than that. Of course, we deal with a tremendous number of questions on a more popular plane. Sport's always cropping up, and we can sometimes offer more than books, old prints and the like. There's film in our archives too, quite a lot of it, and we're always on the lookout for more. You'd be surprised how often historical film turns up, in the junk at the back of the garage, or when someone moves or dies, and so on. So if someone asks, say, about a famous racehorse, we may even be able to show him in action.
My borrower would have liked that, but he's got enough to go on with anyway. I was thinking, that university librarian said a university without a library is like a runner with no legs. Well, isn't it the same for the community? Take away libraries and where would we be?